Right, so if hypocrisy were a marketable commodity, Brussels could probably power the entire continent for the next century, given what it's just done here. The European Union's refusal to sanction Israel, even as famine spreads through Gaza, stage 5 malnutrition threatening the lives of tens of thousands as Israel's genocide pushes towards its 22nd month, has shattered any pretense that Europe stands for the so-called rules-based international order, which is really just a euphemism to preserve Western interests at the expense of everyone else. But to add insult to injury, the same EU that has decided it will very much continue to turn a blind eye to an actual ongoing genocide has been posturing as the moral authority over nuclear negotiations when Iran, lecturing Tehran on international law and threatening sanctions if they don't engage with them, even as Iran are very much still recovering from the unprovoked strikes on their nuclear sites by the apparently completely innocent of anything Israel. Therefore, the EU has abdicated any sense of moral authority here, where Israel's victims face sanctions but Israel remains untouchable. Well, people aren't going to stand for it, and if the glaring double standards aren't going to be pointed out by our hopeless Western media, well, alternatives like this channel absolutely will. Right, so the humanitarian situation in Gaza is catastrophic to the point of being historically unprecedented in scale and severity for such a short time frame now. According to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, over 1 million Palestinian children are now facing starvation due to Israel's total siege, half the population of Gaza as that is, which has systematically blocked food, medical supplies and fuel from entering. Press TV, who have cited UNRWA's warnings, have highlighted how this siege is not an unfortunate byproduct of war, but an intentional strategy designed to starve Gaza into submission. At the same time, Israeli settlement expansion and forced displacement continues apace in the West Bank, with UN reports confirming that 69 Palestinian communities have been uprooted in recent months, the textbook definition of ethnic cleansing, as that absolutely is. Amnesty International, amongst others, have been unequivocal in their condemnation, describing the EU's failure to suspend its association agreement with Israel as green-lighting further atrocities. Even The Guardian, as both siding as that blasted publication can be, has published a piece with a scathing editorial headline labelling Europe's stance as a cruel and unlawful betrayal of the Palestinian people. And even the Spanish outlet El País, which is often cautious in its criticism of EU policy, has run detailed reports questioning the opacity of Europe's so-called humanitarian arrangements with Israel, which appear to be little more than a public relations fig leaf while the genocide continues unabated. European governments have provided no credible evidence that their diplomatic engagement with Israel is delivering any meaningful humanitarian relief at all. Instead, this diplomatic charade serves only to delay any real accountability, and people across Europe are heartily sick of it. Public outrage has been widespread and increasingly confrontational. In Brussels, in Berlin, in Paris, other major cities, thousands have marched under banners accusing the EU of complicity in genocide. Polling data published by European outlets has consistently shown strong public support for sanctions, particularly coming from Spain, Belgium and Ireland. Yet Palestinian representatives have been met not with solidarity, but with what they describe as indifference or outright contempt. Palestinian Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki told Euronews that he was shocked by the EU's failure to take even minimal punitive measures against Israel, accusing Brussels of abandoning the very human rights framework it claims to uphold. His frustration was underscored by the chilling reality that even as protests rage and reports of mass civilian casualties dominate headlines day after day, the EU has not suspended a single arms export licence to Israel. Meanwhile, Israel has treated Europe's cowardice as diplomatic triumph. Euronews has also reported that Israeli officials openly celebrated the EU's decision not to impose sanctions, describing it as proof that Europe understands Israel's security concerns. Israeli ministers have used these statements to claim a propaganda victory, arguing that international criticism of its actions is limited to fringe states. This reaction underlines a really bleak truth. In Tel Aviv, Europe's inaction is not interpreted as neutrality, but as an endorsement. Europe's paralysis over Gaza is not the result of misunderstanding or lack of information either. It's the outcome of calculated political cowardice and economic opportunism. The question that needs answering is why a bloc that reacted so quickly to Russia's invasion of Ukraine with sweeping sanctions and energy bans and asset freezes refuses to impose even a symbolic measure, a single one, against Israel, a state facing credible allegations of literal genocide. Economic interests are at the heart of this double standard, though. Israel's a major supplier of military technology, cybersecurity tools, surveillance systems used by various European governments. German and Italian arms exports to Israel have surged since October 2023, so it's good for business. According to analyses cited by Anadolu Agency, the EU's dependence on Israeli spyware and missile components has become a serious factor in policy making. Additionally, the EU's energy crisis following its pivot away from Russian gas has made Eastern Mediterranean gas fields, particularly those involving Israel, strategically more valuable. Any move to sanction Israel, therefore, could disrupt fragile energy diversification plans and threaten contracts signed with Israel, Egypt and Cyprus. Political and diplomatic pressures also loom large. The EU's foreign policy is still tethered to Washington. What Trump says is what goes, and the Trump administration has made it clear that any European sanctions on Israel will be seen as hostile and unacceptable. Given Europe's dependence on NATO and US security guarantees, particularly for frontline states such as Poland and the Baltic nations, defying Washington is considered too politically costly. Germany's extreme pro-Israel stance, rooted in Holocaust guilt weaponized into unconditional political support, has further locked the EU into an untenable position. As Hungarian Conservative has noted, states like Hungary and Czechia have been actively lobbying against any sanctions and framing them as anti-Israel bias, par for the course for a fascist like Netanyahu's bestie Viktor Orban, I suppose, though. The weaponization of anti-Semitism accusations has created an additional chilling effect on EU policy debates. Pro-Israel lobby groups wield enormous influence, and any politician advocating for sanctions risks being branded anti-Semitic, regardless of whether their criticism focuses strictly on government policies. Finally, the EU's institutional structure itself is a major obstacle. The unanimity requirement for foreign policy decisions effectively hands veto power to pro-Israel governments. Even if a majority of EU members wanted to impose sanctions, Germany or Hungary or Czechia can block any meaningful action. If Europe's refusal to sanction Israel has exposed its moral bankruptcy, its simultaneous pressure on Iran over its nuclear program makes its bankruptcy absurd. As we know, last month Israeli forces carried out unprovoked strikes on Iran's Fordo, Natanz and Isfahan nuclear facilities, together with the US, as they did, acts of aggression that violate the UN Charter prohibition on the use of force. Yet the EU has remained silent, treating Iran as the destabilising actor while refusing to hold Israel accountable. The European Troika, or E3, Germany, France and the UK, have been particularly brazen in its hypocrisy. As Press TV reported, Iranian officials have flatly rejected European attempts to invoke the JCPOA snapback mechanism, arguing that the E3 lacks legal, political or moral standing given its complicity in Israel's aggression. Iranian Foreign Ministry officials summed up the situation with biting accuracy, saying Europeans cannot be both the arsonists and the fire brigade. Where various media have confirmed that negotiations are set to resume, Tehran is approaching them with visible contempt. Under the threat of sanctions, the EU are blatantly and hypocritically weaponizing against them, viewing the E3 as acting in bad faith. And it's difficult when compared to Israel to suggest otherwise, isn't it? The legal contradictions are glaring. Iran remains a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, even if it has left IAEA monitoring. And all despite the disruptions caused by Israel's unprovoked attacks. Israel, by contrast, is a nuclear-armed state outside the NPT, with an undeclared arsenal and a very fresh history of assassinating Iranian scientists and sabotaging civilian nuclear infrastructure now. Yet the EU treats Iran as the threat to global security, while providing diplomatic cover constantly for Israel. And this double standard does not merely undermine Europe's credibility, it erodes the legitimacy of the very international treaties the EU claim to uphold. Europe's refusal to sanction Israel while lecturing Iran has provoked anger both domestically and internationally. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Médecins Sans Frontières have all issued statements condemning Europe's failure to hold Israel accountable. Protests across Europe have grown larger and more confrontational, particularly amongst Arab and Muslim communities who see the EU's inaction as a direct endorsement of genocide, and so is Israel, though, of course, they choose different words, of course. Globally, the EU's reputation has been severely damaged. In much of the global south, Europe is now viewed as nothing more than Washington's vassal, a proxy, much as Israel frankly is. Various independent, alternative and foreign media have mocked Europe's selective application of international law, contrasting its furious reaction to Russian aggression in Ukraine with its silence over Israeli war crimes. Iranian, Russian and Chinese officials routinely cite Gaza as proof that the West's rules-based order, but that it is not order, it is nothing more than a political tool wielded against adversaries while allies are given impunity. And it's, again, very hard, very difficult to refute that point. The long-term consequences will be profound if something doesn't change, though. Strategically, Europe is alienating potential partners in the Middle East and accelerating the shift towards a multipolar world order. Iran is deepening its alliances with Russia and China, while Arab publics increasingly view Europe with contempt. Domestically, the EU's refusal to act is fueling unrest, with mass protests becoming regular features in major cities. Most damaging of all is the erosion of Europe's soft power. The EU has long claimed to be a moral actor, a defender of human rights and international law. That claim is bunkum now, isn't it? It's in tatters. Europe's credibility as a neutral mediator is gone, and you don't get that back quite so easily. The EU's behaviour over Gaza and Iran is not just hypocritical, it's morally catastrophic. By refusing to sanction Israel while pressuring Iran, Europe has exposed itself as a partisan actor applying international law selectively, sacrificing principle for profit and political convenience to their own nations. It has alienated the global south, who are taking action through the Hague Group right now, enraging its own citizens and undermining its claim to be a defender of justice, because clearly it's not. When the history of this moment is written, the EU will not be remembered as a protector of human rights or a guardian of international law. It'll be remembered as a collaborator that looked away as famine spread through Gaza, as a never-again moment happened again, and they let it, and applauded as Israel bombed Iranian nuclear facilities, as they claimed to make the world safer when Iran was working on energy solutions and nuclear medicine breakthroughs. All while posturing as the world's moral conscience at the same time. Well, the truth is they have no conscience. They sold it out to thunderous applause. Fundamentally, what we're looking at here is another example of lawfare being selectively applied. And in a story that turns the tables somewhat on the one you've just watched, it's Iran that's found a way to turn lawfare to their own advantage now, and against Israel at that. So do check out all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch to perhaps cheer yourself up a little bit. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the very same time, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.